Can you imagine just sitting there, rocking gently on your porch, the world quiet around you, only to have your peace shattered by flashing lights and accusing voices? That's exactly what happened to Clara Jefferson, a 76-year-old woman whose simple evening turned into a battle for dignity that would echo far beyond her small town. She was just sitting there, minding her own business, her chamomile tea steaming in a chipped mug that proudly declared, "Black and proud since '63. But when two officers stormed up her steps, ready to turn her life into a crime scene, they had no idea they were walking into a moment that would shake Meadowville, Georgia, to its core. This wasn't just any woman, oh no. This was Clara Jefferson, a living testament to resilience, and what they thought would be a quick arrest became a confrontation that would change everything. What unfolds is a story that'll grip your heart, a tale of assumptions gone wrong, power misused, and a kind of dignity that stands tall, unyielding, even when the world tries to push it down. Think you've heard this story before?
Oh, think again.
The ending? It's like a punch you didn't see coming, raw and real. So grab a seat, crank up the volume, and let's dive into a true clash of courage against corruption. Hey, before we jump in, where are you reading this from?
What time is it where you are?
Drop it in the comments. We love connecting with you. And don't forget to like, share, and tell us what hits you hardest as we unravel this tale. Here we go. In small towns like Meadowville, Georgia, time doesn't just pass, it lingers, settling like dust on an old porch swing, heavy with the weight of stories untold.
Can you picture it?
A place where ancient oaks whisper secrets from a century past, where sidewalks crack not from neglect but from the stubborn roots of families who've called this land home for generations. On the edge of Maple Street, beyond the tidy row of colonial homes with their pristine paint and manicured hedges, there stood a house that wore its age like a badge of honor. A weathered two-story with a wide wraparound porch, its white shutters peeling like memories fading in the sun. To newcomers, it was just another fixer-upper, a relic waiting for a modern makeover. But to the woman in the rocking chair, cradling her tea as the evening softened, that house was her world, her anchor, her everything. Clara Jefferson was 76, her deep brown skin glowing under the golden dusk, her silver hair pinned neatly into a twist that spoke of care and pride. Her eyes, oh those eyes. They held the weight of history, the clarity of truth, and a fire that no hardship could extinguish. That porch wasn't just boards and nails to her. It was sacred ground. It was where she'd raised her 3 children, where she'd mourned her husband's passing, where she'd battled cancer and come out stronger. It was where she'd penned letters to congressmen, her words sharp and unyielding, demanding justice in a world that too often turned its back on women like her. Every evening, as the sun sank behind the maple trees, Clara would settle there, sipping her chamomile tea, watching the world drift by. To her, this house wasn't just a home, it was a monument to every storm she'd weathered, every quiet triumph she'd carved out in a society that so often tried to erase her. Meadowville had changed, hadn't it? Lord, had it changed. 50 years ago, this was a black neighborhood, a vibrant, tight-knit community where pride ran as deep as the roots under the sidewalks. Neighbors didn't just live side by side, they were family. They'd scold your kids for running wild, then sit them down for a plate of cornbread and greens in the same breath. Front porches weren't just for show, they were stages for life's greatest moments, laughter that echoed into the night, stories that wove generations together, protests planned under the cover of dusk. Clara could still hear it, the church down the street, its doors open late for civil rights meetings, the rhythm of feet marching miles because riding the bus meant bowing to indignity. She remembered the sounds of unity, choir voices floating through open windows, the clatter of dominoes on a rickety card table, the soft hum of elders sharing wisdom under the glow of porch lights. But those sounds? They'd faded, replaced by the grind of construction and the buzz of real estate drones circling like vultures. Her neighbors, the ones who'd shared her laughter and her fight, were gone. Some passed on, others pushed out by skyrocketing prices. One by one, their homes were snapped up, flipped into sterile status symbols for a new crowd. In their place came families who didn't know Clara's story, who looked at her with confusion, curiosity, or too often suspicion. They didn't wave as they passed. They didn't stop to chat. Some crossed the street to avoid her, others just stared, their eyes heavy with questions they'd never ask. Did it hurt? Of course it did. But Clara wasn't surprised. She'd lived too long to be shocked by the weight of those glances, the sting of being made to feel like a stranger in her own town. Yet Clara wasn't bitter. Oh no, she was too wise for that. Bitterness takes energy, and she'd learned to save hers for what mattered. But she was aware, deeply aware, of how invisible she'd become in a place where she'd once been a cornerstone. She felt the side eyes, the purses clutched tighter, the whispers she chose to ignore. And still, she sat. Still, she smiled. Every morning, she tended her garden, coaxing roses to bloom despite the heat. Every afternoon, she swept her porch, each stroke a quiet act of defiance. This was her resistance, not loud, not angry, but steady. Just being, existing fully, refusing to vanish in a world that so often wished women like her would fade away.
Can you imagine the strong tag to hold your ground like that?
That evening, the air was thick with the sticky heat of early autumn, the kind that clings to your skin and slows your thoughts to a crawl. Clara rocked gently, the creak of her chair blending with the distant hum of cicadas, a lullaby older than the town itself. Her tea rested on a small table, steam curling from that proud, chipped mug. She wore a lavender dress, pressed to perfection, and slippers worn soft by years of faithful steps. She wasn't thinking about much, just watching the light fade across her rose bushes, letting the stillness wrap around her like a familiar shawl. Across the street, Lindsay Parker strutted by, a 30-something HOA board member with a stiff ponytail and an even stiffer demeanor. Her miniature golden doodle pranced at her side, but her eyes were on Clara's porch. Why did she always look at Clara like that? Like she was an intruder, a puzzle piece that didn't fit in her pristine neighborhood of white fences and renovation loans. Lindsay's shoulders stiffened, her pace quickened, her phone gripped tighter, as if Clara might spring from her rocker and snatch it away. Clara let out a long, slow breath, her face calm but knowing. She'd seen this dance before, too many times to count. It wasn't new, and it wouldn't be the last. In a world like this, it didn't take much to be deemed suspicious, did it? Just your skin, your quiet presence, your audacity to exist in a zip code that no longer felt like yours. Clara had been black, female, and unbothered for 7 decades. She knew what that meant, knew how it looked through eyes clouded by fear or bias. And still she sat, her gaze tracing the sunset behind the maple trees, her heart tethered to the land that held her memories. She rocked because this porch was hers, because her silence was her strength, because sometimes just surviving is a bold statement all its own. Oh, but that evening? Clara had no idea what was barreling toward her down those quiet streets. On that sweltering afternoon, as the heat pressed against Meadowville's aging sidewalks and the sun cast long, heavy shadows over manicured lawns, a phone rang in a house just doors away from Clara's. Lindsay Parker, ever the guardian of her version of order, was on edge. Her fingers shook as she dialed 911, her heart racing with a mix of fear and something uglier, suspicion that didn't need a reason. To her, every creak of Clara's porch swing, every shadow in the dusk, screamed danger. Why was that woman out there, anyway? When the call connected, Lindsay's voice was clipped, overly formal, dripping with urgency. "There's an unusual elderly woman behaving strangely," she said, her words tumbling out like stones. "I've seen her peering into windows at odd angles."
Can you believe it?
Peering into windows, Clara, with her arthritis and her tea, suddenly a threat in Lindsay's frantic imagination. Her fear wasn't just of the unknown, it was rooted in something deeper, something she'd never admit. Unbeknownst to her, the call was about to light a fuse, sparking a confrontation that would shake the town to its roots. The 911 operator, cool and mechanical, scribbled notes, promising help was on the way. But Lindsay's anxiety only grew, her mind spinning wild scenarios that had nothing to do with Clara's simple, steadfast life. She thought she was protecting her community, but had she forgotten the history woven into Meadowville streets? Within minutes, 2 sheriff deputies were dispatched, their black and white cruiser roaring to life, its siren wailing mournfully through the quiet evening. Deputies Troy Conkinade and Miller were on their way, carrying an air of authority that masked the chaos about to erupt. As they pulled up to Clara's modest home, the afternoon's wait seemed to press harder, the air thick with an unspoken warning. The cruiser's engine growled, mingling with the cicada's hum and the rustle of brittle leaves, creating a haunting prelude to a moment no one could have predicted. Troy Conkinade stepped out first, his steely eyes and sharp movements betraying years of hardened experience. His uniform was crisp, but his gaze carried an aggression that set the tone. Miller, younger and less certain, followed, his hand hovering nervously near his holster. Did they sense the storm they were walking into? Or were they too caught up in their own assumptions to notice? Their arrival didn't bring the calm of duty, it brought silence, heavy and foreboding, draping the neighborhood like a fog. A neighbor's camera, maybe Lindsay's own, was already rolling, capturing every step, the deputies determined march up the cracked sidewalk, the quiet defiance of a house that had stood through decades of change, and at the heart of it all, Clara Jefferson, unmoving in her battered rocking chair. Clara, who'd faced storms of every kind, watched them approach with a calm that belied the tension crackling in the air. Did she know what was coming? Maybe not, but she was ready. She'd always known the world could shift against her, that change wasn't always kind. In her mind, memories swirled, laughter of neighbors now gone, chants from civil rights marches, the sting of stares that had trailed her for decades. But this moment? It felt different, charged with a danger sharper than gossip or sidelong glances. The deputy's boots hit the porch steps, each thud a signal that Lindsay's call had unleashed something unstoppable. Miller spoke first, his voice shaky, like he was stepping on thin ice. "Ma'am, may we ask what you're doing?" Formal, yes, but laced with a judgment that cut deep. Troy Kincaid, though? He didn't bother with caution. His questions came fast, sharp, meant to rattle rather than understand. "Why are you out here at this hour? Where have you been?" he demanded, his tone dripping with suspicion that felt like an invasion. Clara's response was soft but unshakable, a reflection of a life forged in resilience. "I've been sitting on my porch since early afternoon, enjoying the evening," she said, her voice steady, unwavering, even as their accusations loomed. Inside, though, she felt it, the weight of having to prove yet again her right to simply be. After all she'd endured, all the years of watching her neighborhood morph into a place that questioned her presence, here she was, defending her peace on her own porch. How many times must one woman fight the same battle? There was no anger in her words, just a deep, aching resolve, tempered by a strength that had carried her through countless trials. Oh, Clara Jefferson, how did she hold such grace under pressure? Her story was just beginning to unfold, and it was about to take a turn that would leave Meadowville forever changed. Can you feel the weight of a moment where the air itself seems to hold its breath, where every sound, a creaking chair, a distant car, carries the echo of history? That's exactly what Clara Jefferson felt on her porch in Meadowville, Georgia, as two deputies turned her quiet evening into a battleground. Oh, the injustice of it. Lindsay Parker's panicked 911 call, born of fear and bias, had twisted Clara's peaceful presence into something sinister, making her a suspect in her own home. How could a 76-year-old woman, sipping chamomile tea, become a threat in the eyes of those sworn to protect? Every word Clara spoke was met with doubt, every pause dissected as if hiding guilt. The tension on that porch was suffocating, a heavy fog that stretched beyond the wooden steps, stirring memories of a segregated past that refused to stay buried. Can you imagine the pain of being judged, not for what you've done, but for who you are? As the deputies' questions grew sharper, their voices cutting like blades, a neighbor's camera rolled silently, capturing the scene, Kincaid's aggressive stance, Miller's uneasy glances, and Clara's unyielding composure. That footage wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror held up to a community fractured by mistrust. Lindsay's call, one that never should have been made, had unleashed a chain of events that would ripple through Meadowville's history, exposing wounds long ignored. It wasn't just a phone call, was it? No, it was a spark igniting years of prejudice, fear, and the unspoken dread of the unfamiliar, all laid bare on Clara's weathered porch. The deputies stood there, their professional masks slipping, revealing a storm of bias brewing beneath. This wasn't a routine stop, it was a confrontation woven into the very fabric of the town, a moment destined to leave scars on everyone it touched. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers, neighbors stealing glances, their footsteps hesitant, their breaths held. Can you sense it? The tension was alive, pulsing in every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves. For Clara, this was no new story, it was another page in a book of systemic injustice she'd been writing for decades. Yet there she sat, a pillar of quiet defiance, her lavender dress pressed just so, her silver hair gleaming under the fading sun. How does someone hold such strength, you ask? Despite the uncertainty swirling around her, Clara remained unshaken, her rocking chair a throne of resistance against a tide of misunderstanding and fear. Every sound, the creak of her rocker, the hum of a passing car, the deputy's staccato questions, blended into a mournful song, a lament for a past that clung to the present like ivy on old brick. And in the background, Lindsay's call, that reckless spark, echoed like a ghost, setting the stage for a drama far bigger than a simple misunderstanding. This was about resilience, about a woman who'd faced adversity for decades and still stood firm, about the human spirit's power to hold fast to truth, no matter how heavy the burden. Suddenly, Clara noticed something. Everything had gone still. The The breeze that once danced through her rose bushes, fragrant with summer's last blooms, had vanished, as if nature itself was bracing for what was to come. The world dimmed, not just from the sinking sun, but from a shift in the air, a darkening energy that wrapped her porch in an eerie hush. Can you feel the chill of that moment? The two deputies, now just feet away, had shed their thin veil of courtesy. Their polite suspicion had hardened into something colder, more menacing. Clara saw it in Conkincade's squared shoulders, the way he stood like a man ready to pounce. She caught it in Miller's darting eyes, seeking cues from his partner, unsure but following along. They weren't here to listen, oh no, they were here to accuse. Conkincade stepped closer, his boots thudding on the porch steps, each one a drumbeat in a confrontation Clara never asked for. He planted himself at the edge of her porch, his presence looming, and barked, "Ma'am, we've had reports of someone walking around the neighborhood looking into windows. You match the description. Do you care to explain what you were doing in the past hour?" The audacity of it. Clara, with her arthritis and her tea, a window-peering prowler? She didn't flinch. Oh, how she held her ground. She looked up at him, slow and steady, her gaze as piercing as it had been decades ago when she silenced rowdy students in her library with a single glance. "Young man," she said, her voice firm yet calm, "I've been on this porch since after lunch. I've not moved from this chair except to fetch a second cup of tea. And frankly, at my age, walking around, peeking into windows, sounds more like fiction than fact." Can you hear the strength in her words? But Conkincade wasn't swayed. His lips curled into a smug half-grin, the kind that says, "I've already won." "So you're saying the witness lied?" he shot back, his tone dripping with challenge. Clara's fingers tightened slightly on the armrests of her chair, the wood worn smooth by years of her touch. "I'm saying," she replied, each word deliberate, "that your witness is mistaken. Or maybe their imagination got the best of them." Miller shifted uneasily behind his partner, his eyes scanning the porch, the chipped flower pots brimming with geraniums, the sun-faded cushion on Clara's rocker, the crossword puzzle folded neatly beside her teacup, half finished with a pencil tucked inside. Did it strike him how ordinary it all was? How peaceful. But peace wasn't what they'd come for. They were on a mission, weren't they? Suspicious activity, elderly woman, check it out, confirm the call, close the report, that was the plan. Conkincade, though, seemed hell-bent on turning nothing into something. He stepped forward, now standing right in front of Clara, too close, his shadow falling over her like a storm cloud. His hand rested on his utility belt, fingers brushing the edge of his holster in a move meant to be subtle but screamed intimidation. Clara saw it, oh, she saw it clear as day. She'd seen that gesture before, not just from men like him, but in different uniforms in different towns, across decades of a life where that hand near a weapon meant control, fear dressed up as authority. It was never a good sign, was it? He leaned in, his voice stripped of any pretense. "Look," he said, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You come with us, we ask a few questions downtown, and if everything checks out, you're home by dinner. Or you keep playing games, and we detain you for obstruction.
Your choice."
Clara sat up straighter, her spine a steel rod of resolve. Her voice didn't waver, her breath didn't falter. How does one summon such calm in the face of aggression? She'd learned, through years as a black woman in America, that composure wasn't just wise, it was survival. "Officer," she said, her words clear as a bell, "I am not going anywhere.
I've done nothing wrong.
If you have questions, you can ask them right here in full view of my neighbors and your body cams. I will not be intimidated in my own home." Can you feel the power in that stand? Conkincade's eyes narrowed, his face hardening.
You're refusing à l'offre d'air.
"I'm refusing to be treated like a criminal," Clara shot back, her voice steady as stone. Miller, sensing the edge they were teetering on, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his tone softer but still hollow, "this is just procedure. We need to verify the call." "If we can get a statement," Clara cut him off, her voice cracking not with fear but with the weight of a lifetime's worth of this same question. "Do I look like a threat to you?" she asked, her eyes locking onto his. "Do I look like someone casing houses? Or do I look like a 76-year-old woman with arthritis who's lived on this street longer than either of you has worn a badge?" Oh, that silence. It was long unbearable, the kind that shouldn't exist on a porch at dusk, heavy with the ghosts of countless moments like this. Neighbors had crept outside now, their silhouettes faint in the fading light. Across the street, someone filmed from behind a bush, the lens catching every 10th second. A dog barked 2 houses down, then fell silent, as if it too felt the gravity. Conkincaid's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek as he glared down at Clara, his authority challenged in a way he hadn't expected. "I'm not going to ask again," he said, his voice low and dangerous.
Stand up. Plusieurs en behind your back.
"You're being detained for questioning." Clara's hands trembled, but she gripped her chair's arms, anchoring herself. Her voice, when it came, was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I will not stand, and I will not go with you. If you want to arrest me, you'll have to physically remove me, and I promise you I will not go quietly." Can you hear the thunder in those words? No yelling, no tears, just a quiet storm of resistance, rolling out like a hymn passed down through generations. Her dignity was a fortress, unshakable, standing tall against the tide. Conkincaid surged forward, his boots pounding the porch's worn wood, his voice rising. "That's it. You're resisting. Let's go." Clara didn't flinch. Oh, how she held her ground. Miller hesitated, the weight of the moment crashing over him. Did he see it? The neighbors watching, the camera rolling, the headlines forming, complaints, lawsuits, a future spiraling out of control? He froze, caught in the gravity of what was unfolding. But Conkincaid pressed on, undeterred, his authority blinding him to the storm he was stoking. Then, just as the moment teetered on the brink, a new sound pierced the silence. A low rumble, tires gripping pavement, a vehicle approaching fast.
Not a cruiser, no, something Givier, something différent.
A black SUV, windows tinted, moved with a precision that didn't match Meadowville's sleepy streets. It turned the corner and stopped in front of Clara's house. The deputies glanced up, startled. Clara didn't need to look. She knew. Her lips parted, not in fear, but in relief, a quiet exhale of trust. The driver's door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall, poised, his navy blue uniform crisp, brass pins glinting in the dying light. His face was calm, but his eyes? They burned with fire. Elijah Jefferson had arrived, and the air shifted, charged with the promise that everything was about to change. The second that SUV rolled up, Clara knew, oh, she knew. No need to stand, no need to squint. She recognized the hum of that engine, the steady rhythm of those footsteps. Elijah, her son, her pride, her protector. But more than that, he was the embodiment of everything she'd poured into him. Discipline, compassion, a fire that burned for justice, and a wisdom earned through years of navigating a world that often stood against him. As he stepped out, tall and commanding, the porch seemed to expand, making room for the weight of what was coming. His presence didn't shout, it didn't need to. It carried, radiating an authority not just from his badge but from a life of hard-won integrity. Can you imagine the deputies' shock? They had no idea they'd stumbled into a moment that would redefine everything.
What is going on here?
Elijah's voice was calm but sharp, cutting through the tension like a gavel strike. Conkincaid turned slowly, his hand still near his holster, a reflex he couldn't shake. Miller stepped back, almost instinctively, his eyes wide as he took in the man striding toward them like he owned the street. And in that moment, didn't he? The second Elijah arrived, this stopped being a routine call. It became something monumental, a clash of truth against assumption, of dignity against bias. The porch, Clara's sanctuary, was now a stage, and the drama unfolding was about to shake Meadowville to its core.
Oh, what a moment. Quand you feel the shift?
Oh, can you feel the electricity in the air, the kind that crackles when truth collides with injustice? On Clara Jefferson's porch in Meadowville, Georgia, the tension was a living thing, pulsing with the weight of decades of struggle. Clara sat motionless in her rocking chair, her lavender dress catching the last rays of the setting sun, her silver hair gleaming like a crown of wisdom. Was she afraid?
Not a chance.
She stayed still, not out of fear, but to let her son, Elijah, shine in this moment. For years, she'd poured her heart into teaching him how to navigate a world that too often feared strong black men. And now? That boy she'd raised was a man who didn't just survive. He led, standing tall with a fire in his soul that no badge could dim. Can you imagine the pride swelling in her chest? Deputy Conkincaid, his voice sharp with misplaced authority, broke the silence first. "Sir, this is a police matter. I'm going to have to ask you to stand back." Stand back? As if Elijah would retreat when his mother's dignity was on the line. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't waste a single word. Instead, he reached into his crisp navy jacket, pulled out his ID, and extended it with a calm that cut deeper than any shout.
The badge caught the golden light of evening, glinting like a beacon of truth.
And the words etched on it? They spoke louder than any speech. Commander Elijah Jefferson, State Bureau of Homeland Security.
Oh, what a moment!
Can you see the deputies' faces? Miller's mouth fell open, a flicker of shock betraying his unease. Conkincaid's jaw tightened, his confidence crumbling under the weight of that revelation. Elijah's voice was slow, deliberate, each word a stone in a foundation of justice. This woman, he said, is Clara Jefferson. She's a 76-year-old widow who raised 3 children in this home. She's lived here for over 5 decades. And she's also my mother. Those words hit like a hammer, didn't they? Simple yet shattering, they tore through every assumption Conkincaid had clung to when he stormed up those porch steps. Suddenly, he wasn't facing someone he thought he could intimidate. He was standing before a high-ranking officer, a man with power, reach, and a personal stake in this fight, a son defending his mother's honor.
Can you feel the shift in the air?
I'm going to ask you once, Elijah continued, his tone not fiery but forged in steel, unyielding and precise. What exactly are you accusing my mother of? Conkincaid swallowed hard, his bravado faltering. We had a report of suspicious activity, he stammered. A woman matching her description was said to be looking into windows. Elijah's eyes narrowed, his voice cutting through the excuse like a blade. And based on that vague call, you approached an elderly woman sitting on her porch, attempted to detain her, and reached for your weapon?
Can you believe the audacity? No one touched a weapon. Conkincaid shot back, but the wordra.
In hollow, even to him. Clara, her voice soft but piercing, finally spoke. He tried to take me downtown, she said, her words carrying the weight of a lifetime's worth of such moments. Said I could either come quietly or be arrested. Elijah's gaze snapped back to Conkincaid, his eyes burning with controlled fury. So you escalated on a grandmother with no weapon, no threat, no evidence, and no crime. Conkincaid opened his mouth, but Elijah raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture as sharp as a whip. Don't. Just stop. You've already done enough. Miller, sensing the ground shifting beneath them, stepped forward, his voice tentative. Sir, we didn't realize what? Elijah's tone was sharper now, slicing through the deputy's weak defense. That a black woman could live here? That she could belong? You didn't think she was someone's mother. You didn't stop for 1 second to ask yourselves who she was because you thought you already knew. Oh, the truth in those words. They hung in the air, heavy with the pain of a community too often misjudged. Silence fell over the neighborhood, a quiet so profound it seemed to hush even the cicadas. More neighbors had gathered, their phones raised, capturing every second of this unfolding drama. No one spoke, but their eyes screamed volumes. This wasn't just about Clara anymore, was it? It was about every person who'd ever been judged, dismissed, or feared for simply existing. Clara looked out at the street, at the crowd forming like a quiet chorus, at the officers whose authority had just been challenged. Her heart beat steady, unshaken. She'd lived through worse, far worse, but this moment wasn't about her pain. It was about her son's pride, the pride of a man who'd learned from her strength and now wielded it like a shield. She knew the confrontation she'd endured, sitting alone under the crushing weight of suspicion, was something Elijah could never unsee. Did it break her heart to be the target again? Of course it did. But oh, how it swelled with pride to see him carry her defense, standing tall beside her, his navy uniform a symbol of everything she'd fought for. Elijah stepped closer to the porch, his presence a quiet anchor beside his mother, though his eyes never left the deputies. I want your badge numbers, he said, his voice firm, unyielding. I want a copy of your body cam footage, and I want a report filed with the sheriff's office tonight. Conkincaid's jaw clenched, his pride stung. With all due respect, Commander, we were following protocol. No, Elijah cut in, his words like a blade through fog. You were following bias. Protocol is for when you investigate threats, not people. What you did was harassment. What you did was assume. Miller looked away, his face a mask of guilt, unable to meet Elijah's gaze. Conkincaid stared, first at Elijah, then at Clara, then back again, the confidence draining from his features like water from a cracked vase. Now, Elijah said, his voice steady as granite, you're going to leave this property, and you're going to do it quietly. A pause followed, long and heavy, the kind where choices become consequences, where the weight of action settles like dust after a storm. Can you feel the gravity of that moment? Then, without a word, the deputies turned. Miller moved quickly, eager to escape the spotlight. Kincaid stepped slower, his pride wounded, his authority fractured, each step a grudging retreat. As they climbed into their cruiser, Clara exhaled, a breath she'd held for what felt like hours, the tension finally loosening its grip. Elijah turned to her, his voice soft, laced with concern. You okay, Mama? She nodded once, her eyes warm but weary. I'm all right now. He stepped onto the porch and knelt beside her, resting one hand on her knee, his touch a quiet promise of protection. Clara placed her weathered hand over his, her fingers tracing the lines of a life spent nurturing, fighting, loving. She looked at him the way only a mother could, part pride, part sadness, part love so deep it defied words. I'm sorry you had to see that, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of yet another battle. No, Elijah said, his eyes fierce with devotion, I'm sorry you had to go through it. They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, the world around them softening into dusk. I taught you to fight for what's right, she said finally, her voice steady now, a beacon in the fading light. You did, he replied, a faint smile breaking through, and you showed me how to do it with grace. Down the street, the patrol car vanished around the corner, its echo lingering like a fading storm. But the fire in Elijah's chest burned bright, and the ache in Clara's bones told a story of resilience that no injustice could silence. This wasn't new, was it? What happened on that porch had happened before, countless times, but this time, it was recorded, captured for the world to see. And what came next? Oh, it was more than a personal reckoning. It was the spark of something bigger, something that would ripple far beyond Meadowville's quiet streets. But for that fleeting moment, that one sacred pause, mother and son sat side by side, the sky dimming above them, the weight of injustice pressing down like the dusk itself. Yet in their hearts burned a certainty, fierce and unyielding, they were not backing down. Not now, not ever. The cruiser hadn't even rounded the corner before Clara felt it, a shift in the air, as if the heavy tension that had coiled around her porch like a venomous snake was finally slithering away. But the sting? Oh, it lingered, as it always did, a quiet ache that never fully faded. Elijah was still crouched beside her, one hand clasped over hers, the other curled into a tight fist, his knuckles taut with restrained fury. His jaw was locked, muscles twitching beneath his skin, and though his voice had been calm during the confrontation, his silence now roared with everything he held back. Can you imagine the storm raging inside him? Clara gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her touch soft but firm, a mother's reassurance. You can let it out now, baby, she said, her voice a soothing balm. He didn't look at her right away, his eyes fixed on the porch steps where the deputies had stood, as if he could will their footprints away, erase the violation of this sacred space. Finally, he let out a slow, controlled breath, his voice barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief. They were going to arrest you. They were going to put their hands on you. Clara nodded, her gaze steady, unflinching. They were. Elijah stood, towering over the porch, over the neighborhood, his broad shoulders carrying a weight heavier than the street could hold, a man burdened by the injustice he'd just witnessed. That's not going to stand, he muttered, his voice low, resolute. Not here. Not ever. Inside his SUV, the radio buzzed faintly, dispatch still active, another call echoing in some other corner of the world. But this call, this moment, it was his, and he was going to see it through to the end. He turned back to his mother, his eyes softening with concern. You okay if I make a few calls? Clara looked at him, her gaze as steady as the oak trees lining Maple Street. Do what you have to do, she said. I've done my part. Elijah nodded, stepping off the porch, his phone already in hand, fingers moving with the precision of a man on a mission. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, only action, fueled by a son's love and a commander's resolve. He called the sheriff's office first, then internal affairs, then the state's legal affairs unit, his voice steady, demanding accountability, real names, real reports, body cam footage, dispatch records, incident logs. He wanted every piece of this puzzle, and he wasn't waiting around. Within 10 minutes, the sheriff himself was on the line, his voice cautious, tight with the weight of what he'd just heard. Elijah, I'm hoping this is all a misunderstanding, he said, but Elijah cut him off, sharp and unyielding. It's not. And I suggest you get ahead of it now before it hits the media. I want both deputies suspended pending review. I want their cams pulled, and I want full access to the 911 call. A pause hung on the line, heavy with the sheriff's reluctance. We'll begin the review process. No, Elijah interrupted, his voice a blade of certainty. You'll begin the suspension process because if you don't, I will, and I'll bring the state with me. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise, forged in the fire of justice. Clara, back in her rocker, watched her son move with purpose, his silhouette framed against the dusk. This wasn't just for her, was it? It was for every elder who'd been made to feel small, every neighbor questioned for daring to exist in a place deemed wrong by those too blind to see their worth. Pride swelled in her chest, but oh, there was an ache too, a quiet sorrow that her son's strength had to be used this way, against those who should have been allies. But she knew, deep in her bones, that justice sometimes demanded such battles. Words spread like wildfire in Meadowville. By sundown, the street was alive with whispers, neighbors peering from windows, others drifting toward Clara's yard under the guise of walking dogs or checking mailboxes, their eyes darting to the porch, to the SUV, to the man pacing with unwavering determination. Someone finally dared to ask, was everything okay earlier? Clara's gaze was steady, her voice soft but sure. It is now. But was it really? Not even close. Something had cracked open that evening, something buried beneath the polite smiles of homeowner meetings and the carefully worded newsletters that papered over the town's divides. This encounter had ripped through the illusion of safety, the cozy neutrality people wrapped around themselves like a warm coat. But coats don't stop bullets, handcuffs, or suspicion, do they? And Clara knew that better than anyone. Elijah returned to the porch, his phone still warm from the flurry of calls. They're suspended, he said, his voice steady but edged with resolve. Effective immediately, both of them. And the department's issuing a formal apology. Sheriff wants to meet in the morning. Clara nodded slowly, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. You did that fast. I had to, Elijah replied, before they tried to rewrite it. Clara's chuckle was soft, dry, carrying the weight of a lifetime's wisdom. Oh baby, she said, they've been rewriting it since long before you were born. Elijah sat beside her, his anger still simmering but softened by her presence, her voice flowing over him like water smoothing a jagged stone. I can't believe they were going to haul you off like some criminal in your own house. Clara sipped her cold tea, her eyes distant but sharp. You'd be surprised how often something like that crosses their minds, she said. I've had plenty of run-ins over the years. You just weren't there to see them. Those words hit Elijah like a punch, his jaw tightening, his heart aching at the thought of all the battles she'd fought alone. I hate that, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I hate knowing you've been through this more times than I'll ever know. Can you feel the pain in that admission, the love and fury intertwined? Clara's gaze softened, but her voice was firm, a mother's wisdom cutting through the hurt. Don't hate it, she said. Just do something with it. Elijah nodded, the weight of her words settling into him, a call to action he'd carry forward. The porch lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the steps, illuminating the chipped paint and worn boards that held a lifetime of memories. This porch, this house, it was more than a place. It was a testament to Clara's endurance, a stage where justice had just taken a stand. And as the night deepened, mother and son sat together, their silence louder than any siren, stronger than any badge, a quiet promise that they'd keep fighting, keep standing, keep holding the line against a world that too often tried to push them down. Oh, can you feel the weight of a mother's wisdom, the kind that cuts through pain and lights a path forward? On Clara Jefferson's porch in Meadowville, Georgia, the air was thick with the aftermath of a confrontation that had shaken the town to its core. Clara turned to her son, Elijah, her eyes soft but firm, like the steady glow of a lantern in a storm. Don't hate it, she said, her voice a quiet anchor. Just do something with it. Can you imagine the strength it took to say that, to turn decades of hurt into a call for action? Elijah nodded slowly, thoughtfully, his heart heavy but resolute. I will, he promised, and oh, he meant it, every word a vow etched in the fire of his resolve. The porch lights flicked on, casting a warm yellow glow over the weathered steps, illuminating a space that had once been a haven of stories, of peace, of summer nights alive with fireflies and the soft hum of gospel music drifting from a radio. Now? It was a battleground, scarred not by bullets but by the deep wounds of injustice. Can you see it, this sacred porch transformed? Across the street, Lindsay Parker stood frozen, clutching her little golden doodle, her eyes locked on the scene she'd unwittingly set in motion. Had she realized the storm her 911 call would unleash? Elijah saw her, his gaze sharp but silent. Clara saw her too, her face unreadable, but neither spoke. Not yet. Oh, there'd be time for that later. For now they just sat, mother and son, their silence louder than any siren, stronger than any badge. It was the kind of silence that follows a tempest, not empty, but brimming with memory, survival, and a line drawn in the sand. Beneath that quiet, a new rhythm was rising, slow and unshakable, like the heartbeat of a town waking up. This wasn't over, was it? No, it had only just begun. By the next morning, Meadowville was different. Can you feel the shift? Not just for Clara, not just for Elijah, but for every soul who'd watched from behind drawn curtains or lingered at the edge of their porch steps, witnessing history unfold on a cracked slab of concrete most had overlooked. The sunlight spilled through Clara's curtains, same as always, but the air? It was charged, alert, as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. Clara stirred her chamomile tea, her hands slow and steady, the rhythm of a woman who'd faced countless storms and come out stronger. Her phone buzzed more than usual, friends she hadn't heard from in years, churchfolk with warm voices, a cousin in Atlanta who'd seen a clip online. Even her niece in Baltimore had caught it, a black mother confronted by police, saved by her son, a Homeland Security commander. Can you believe it? All this in less than 12 hours. Elijah knew the story would spread, but this fast? Oh, it was like wildfire. Social media was a spark, and someone, probably a teenager down the street, had uploaded a grainy but unmistakable cell phone video before bedtime. That footage showed everything: the deputies storming Clara's porch, her refusal to stand, Conkincade's hand hovering over his weapon like a threat unspoken, and then Elijah's arrival, calm, authoritative, his fury restrained but blazing in a way only someone deeply trained could manage. It ended with him demanding badge numbers, threatening suspensions, and walking off like the hero in a film's final scene. But this wasn't a movie, was it? This was real. Someone's mother, someone's home, a life laid bare for the world to see. At 6:47 a.m., the sheriff called Elijah, his voice tighter than a coiled spring. He wasn't calling to apologize, no, he was scrambling to contain the fallout. "We've got news crews coming by noon," he said. "We need a statement. We need to present a unified response." Elijah stood at the end of Clara's walkway, dressed in plain clothes but carrying himself with the unshakable authority of the officer he was. "You want unity," he said flatly, his words cutting through the sheriff's platitudes. "Start by acknowledging what actually happened. Don't spin it. Don't downplay it. 2 of your deputies threatened a 76-year-old woman because they didn't think she belonged. And if I hadn't shown up, you think she wouldn't have been cuffed, hauled in? You think that would have made the evening news?" Can you hear the steel in his voice, the demand for truth? A pause hung on the line, heavy with the sheriff's hesitation. "We're suspending both officers without pay," he finally said. "Effective immediately. Internal Affairs is pulling their last 6 months of traffic and civilian stop data. You were right. There are patterns." Elijah didn't reply at first, his gaze fixed down the block where 2 kids walked their dog past Clara's house, slower than usual, their eyes darting to the porch like it was a sacred shrine. "Good," he said at last. "Then say that in the statement, and don't make this about me. Make it about her. My mother deserves that." Across town, the precinct was eerily quiet. Can you feel the tension? Deputy Troy Conkincade sat in the briefing room, arms crossed, face pale, his uniform still crisp but weighed down by the gravity of what he'd done. He hadn't slept, had driven straight to the station after leaving Clara's neighborhood, desperate to outrun the consequences. But there was no outrunning this, was there? The video had reached the captain before Conkincade even walked in. When Internal Affairs pulled him aside that morning, he knew, no gentle reminder, no written warning. Not this time. His partner, Miller, sat across the room, silent, his face not angry but shaken, like someone who just glimpsed the edge of a cliff they'd nearly fallen from. In the hallway, other officers whispered, some supportive, others shaking their heads, disappointed, embarrassed, or relieved it wasn't them. Then came the knock on the glass door, slow and deliberate. The captain entered, a folder in hand, an investigator at his side. Kincaid didn't look up. Troy Kincaid, Jacob Miller, the captain said, his voice cold, your body cams have been pulled. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending the outcome of this investigation. Kincaid stared ahead, his mouth a flat line, unyielding. Miller just nodded, his hands trembling slightly. Hand over your badges and your service weapons. The metal clinked on the table. Oh, didn't it sound like thunder, a final note in a song of reckoning? Back on Clara's porch, the world was quieter, softer. She sat with a light blanket draped across her knees, the early morning breeze stirring the geraniums in her flower pots. Was she interested in being a headline, a trending topic, the face of a movement? Not at all. She was tired, not just physically, but deep in her soul. Clara had lived through the 60s, marched for voting rights with blisters on her feet, raised 3 children under the shadow of redlining and whispered segregation. She'd seen whites' only signs come down, but the stairs? Those lingered, didn't they? And now, at 76, she was reminded yet again that sitting peacefully on her porch wasn't always seen as peaceful when her skin told a story some refused to read. Elijah brought her fresh lemon water, placing it gently on the side table, its glass sweating in the morning warmth. He said nothing, just stood beside her, a silent pillar of love. Clara glanced at him. They're suspended, she said, her voice soft but knowing. He nodded. With an investigation underway. It's official. Clara gave the smallest shrug, her lips pursed. Won't change what they did. No, Elijah admitted, sitting beside her, his voice heavy with truth, but maybe it changes what they do next time. She looked at him, her eyes not unkind but carrying a mother's knowing, a wisdom carved from years of battles. And how many more next times will it take? Oh, that question. It hung in the air unanswered, a challenge to the world itself. Later that afternoon, a press conference unfolded on the county courthouse steps, flags snapping in the breeze, the sheriff flanked by the mayor, council members, and reluctantly, Elijah himself. Clara stayed home. Did she care for pageantry? Not a bit. The sheriff cleared his throat, his voice steady but strained. Yesterday evening, a resident of our community, Miss Clara Jefferson, was approached and wrongfully threatened by 2 deputies responding to an unfounded 911 call. Their conduct fell short of our department's standards and the standards of decency. We are taking full responsibility, launching an internal review, and expanding our department-wide training on racial bias and community engagement. This cannot and will not be ignored. Can you hear the weight of those words, the admission of a wrong too long ignored? He gestured to Elijah, who stepped forward, his voice cool but unwavering, cutting through the buzz of microphones. My mother should not have had to defend her dignity from her own porch. She should not have had to prove she belonged. No one should. And if we want to talk about public safety, then we must talk about how that safety has to apply to every resident, not just the ones that look like they fit a certain picture. The crowd was silent, reporters scribbling furiously, but the truth wasn't in the sound bites, was it? It was in the quiet after, in the nods rippling through the crowd, in the way community members, black, white, young, old, approached Elijah afterward, not with questions but with quiet gratitude, their eyes saying what words couldn't. Back at home, Clara switched off the television before the press conference ended. Did she need to hear it? No, she already knew. Her porch had become a stage, not by her choice but by necessity, its chipped paint and worn boards now a symbol of resistance. The spotlight might have shifted to her son, but the story? Oh, it was hers, her stillness, her refusal, her quiet storm that had shaken Meadowville awake. Change doesn't always roar in with a bang, does it? Sometimes it arrives with a rocking chair and a woman who simply says no. As streetlights flickered on across Meadowville, the weight of that porch confrontation settled into the neighborhood's bones. But for Deputies Troy Kincaid and Miller, it was a landslide, crushing their confidence. Inside their cruiser, silence sat like a third passenger, heavy and unyielding. Miller fidgeted, his hands restless on his duty belt, his mind replaying the moment. Kincaid stared ahead, jaw clenched, eyes hard but flickering with doubt. Was he trying to rewrite it, to find a version where he hadn't threatened the mother of a high-ranking commander, on camera, with witnesses, his hand hovering over his holster like a reckless dare? No matter how he spun it, the truth remained. Clara's rocking chair, her calm defiance, and Elijah's voice, steady but powerful, saying, "You're dealing with my mother. And I am Commander Elijah Jefferson." Can you imagine the jolt that hit them? Miller's stomach had plummeted at those words. Kincaid had flinched, just enough for the crowd to see. That moment of recognition, that cold slap of "we messed up," washed over them like ice water in a heat wave. When you wear a badge, you're trained to read people, aren't you? And Elijah Jefferson was no one to cross, not with a crowd watching, not when he held every card. Even now, in their squad car, the hum of texts and radio chatter couldn't drown out the reality. This wasn't something they could escape, not with protocol, not with excuses, not with paperwork. Kincaid rubbed his temples, frustration boiling over. She didn't identify herself, he muttered, more to the steering wheel than Miller. She didn't say who her son was. How were we supposed to know? But did it matter? You don't need a resume to treat someone with dignity, do you? That wasn't the point, and deep down, they both knew it. They hadn't questioned Clara because she seemed dangerous. They'd assumed she didn't belong, and that assumption had unraveled everything. Oh, what a price to pay for a moment's bias. Oh, can you feel the weight of truth settling over Meadowville like a storm finally breaking? The patterns were undeniable, glaring in their injustice. Disproportionate stops in majority-black neighborhoods, reports so vague they reeked of bias, and at least 3 other complaints from elderly residents, swept under the rug as if their voices didn't matter. Can you believe it? The data was a damning mirror, reflecting a rot that had festered unchecked for far too long. Inside the cruiser, Miller sat in silence, his hands fidgeting, unable to answer Kincaid's feeble defense. Why? Because deep down, he knew it was pointless. You don't need a resume to treat someone with dignity, do you? That wasn't the issue. They hadn't questioned Clara Jefferson because she seemed dangerous. They'd assumed she didn't belong, an old black woman on her porch triggering something ugly in their assumptions. And now? Oh, that assumption had come back to bite them, hard and unrelenting. Back on Clara's porch, Elijah stood, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but fierce, speaking to someone from his department. Can you imagine the fire in his heart? In the last 30 minutes, he'd made 4 calls, each one climbing higher up the chain, each one sparking urgency in those who thought they were too distant to feel the heat. His calm never wavered, but his resolve? It was razor-sharp, honed by a son's love and a commander's duty. When he ended the final call, he turned to Clara, his mother, sitting steadfast in her rocking chair, her lavender dress catching the glow of the porch light. They're going to be investigated, he said, his voice steady but heavy with purpose. Internal Affairs is already preparing a statement. There's going to be a full review. Clara nodded, her face etched with wisdom but no trace of satisfaction. And then what? She asked, her question slicing deeper than Elijah expected. They move on to the next house, the next porch? Can you hear the weariness in her voice, the weight of a lifetime spent facing the same battle? Elijah looked down, her words cutting into him like a knife. Not if I can help it, he vowed, his voice a quiet promise that carried the strength of mountains. He stepped off the porch, his boots soft on the grass, and walked slowly to where the deputy's cruiser still idled across the street, its lights off but engine humming. He stopped at the window, his presence commanding. Kincaid didn't look up at first, his pride bruised, but Miller did, hastily rolling down the glass, his eyes wide with guilt. We're not done, Elijah said, his voice quiet but sharp enough to pierce the night. Kincaid turned, his gaze wary. Commander Jefferson, I understand this is personal for you. Elijah cut him off, not loud, but with a precision that sliced through the air. You think this is personal because she's my mother? He paused, stepping closer, his eyes burning with truth. Let me be very clear. This isn't just about my mother. This is about every call you've ever responded to where your first instinct was suspicion, not service. It's about how quickly you reached for your weapon when you saw a woman sitting still and silent on her own porch. Can you feel the power in those words, the way they laid bare the deputy's bias? Kincaid tried to deflect, his voice quick. We were following up on a report. We got a call from a neighbor. A neighbor who assumed, Elijah snapped, his tone like a whip, and instead of checking facts, you charged in with your mind made up. That's not policing. That's profiling. Miller looked away, guilt carved into his face, unable to meet Elijah's gaze. Kincaid opened his mouth, but Elijah silenced him with a single raised hand, a gesture as commanding as a gavel strike. You should know this too, he continued, his voice steady but searing. I've already filed the formal complaint. Internal Affairs will be reviewing not just today's footage, but your record over the past year. Every stop, every call, every escalation. If there's a pattern, and I suspect there is, you won't just be suspended. You'll be stripped of your badge. Oh, didn't that hit like a thunderclap? Kincaid blinked, his face flushing, the weight of his actions crashing down. And just so we're clear, Elijah added, his words a final nail, this isn't retaliation. This is accountability, something this profession sorely lacks. He turned, walking back to the sidewalk, his posture straight, unbowed by the stares of neighbors still watching, their phones capturing every second. Behind him, the cruiser sat frozen, its occupant suffocating in a silence that screamed of consequences. Elijah didn't revel in it, no gloating, no smugness. That wasn't his way. But oh, what he felt. A burning behind his ribs, a fury that this had to go so far, that it always seemed to go this far. Can you feel the ache in his heart? He sat back beside Clara, rubbing his palms together as if trying to wash away the stain of injustice. I'm proud of you, Clara said, her voice warm, a mother's love wrapping around him like a shawl. I'm tired, Elijah replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Tired of this cycle. Tired of defending what should be obvious. Clara nodded, her eyes knowing. That's how they wear you down, she said, her words carrying the weight of decades. Not all at once, but little by little, year by year. Elijah looked at her, his gaze softening, filled with awe. How'd you do it, Mama? All those years, how'd you not lose your mind? Her faint smile was a beacon, a light through the storm. I almost did plenty of times, she admitted, her voice soft but steady. But I had you and your sisters and your father, and I had this house, this porch, my garden, my peace. She looked out across the yard, her roses standing proud despite drought, winter, and time, their petals glowing in the porch light. Peace, she repeated, is a kind of protest, too. Can you hear the wisdom in that, the quiet power of holding fast to what's yours? Elijah leaned back, the first deep breath filling his lungs since he'd arrived, a moment of reprieve in a battle far from over. He knew the road ahead, interviews, statements, a media circus once that footage hit the airwaves. But for now, for this one sacred pause, they'd held the line. Across the street, Lindsay Parker had slipped inside, her blinds drawn tight, as if she could hide from the storm she'd unleashed. And behind the blinds of a dozen other homes, the truth was sinking in. Clara Jefferson hadn't just survived that evening, had she? She'd reclaimed it, her son a quiet storm in uniform, reminding everyone what power looks like when it defends dignity. Some moments don't end with arrests or chases or explosions, do they? Some end with a chair that never moved, a voice that never wavered, and a son who arrived just in time. The days that followed felt like a dream, surreal and heavy. To the world beyond Meadowville, Clara had become a symbol, an icon of strength and grace, her face splashed across news articles and local TV under headlines like the porch that sparked a reckoning, or she refused to stand and changed a town. But inside her modest two-story home, with its creaking floors and fading wallpaper, she was just Clara, a woman weary from attention she never sought, never wanted. Can you imagine the burden of that spotlight? Calls poured in nonstop, reporters hungry for sound bites, activists offering support, students seeking wisdom, ministers with prayers. Some wanted interviews, others just wanted to say, thank you. Handwritten letters arrived, fresh roses appeared anonymously, and one elderly white woman left a lemon cake on Clara's porch with a note that read, I'm sorry. Clara appreciated it all, oh she did. But her smile was rare that week. Why? Because heroism shouldn't come from surviving what never should have happened. She still sat on her porch every evening, same chair, same routine, her chamomile tea steaming in that proud mug. But the air felt different now, didn't it? Some neighbors waved more, their gestures tentative but warm. Others avoided her gaze entirely, hurrying past. A few stopped to chat, their curiosity cautious, their words fumbling. Most moved faster, unsure what to say to a woman whose quiet stand had shaken their world. Elijah noticed it too, the tension simmering beneath the surface of daily life. Meadowville was quiet, but unsettled, like a town holding its breath. The sheriff's department launched the investigation as promised, public statements rolling out, internal affairs digging through over 50 stop reports tied to Kincaid and Miller. The patterns were stark, disproportionate stops in black neighborhoods, vague justifications, and complaints from elders ignored. Can you see the rot exposed, the truth laid bare? The people spoke too, their voices rising like a river breaking free. At a church community forum, dozens came forward, some nervous, some furious, pouring out stories like water from a cracked dam. An older man shared being stopped on his walk home from the grocery store, accused of lurking. A single mother recounted her teenage son being frisked 3 blocks from home for wearing a hoodie in summer. And an elderly woman, nearly Clara's age, admitted she now wore her ID on a lanyard, just in case they asked again. Can you feel the pain in those stories? Elijah sat in the back pew, hands folded, jaw tight, listening as each tale tightened the knot in his chest. Back home, Clara was folding laundry, her hands steady despite the weight in her spirit. Not age, but something heavier, a soul-deep fatigue. Elijah leaned against the doorframe, his voice low. How was it? She asked without looking up. Hard, important, he said. I wish you'd come. She shook her head, her lips pursed. I've spent enough years being told to be quiet. I don't need to tell them what they already know. They need to hear it from each other now. He nodded, understanding even when it stung. They're starting to get it, Mama. Finally. Clara set the last towel in the basket, her voice firm. Understanding is one thing. Changing is another. Oh, didn't that truth cut deep? The next morning, the sheriff's department held another press conference, flanked by a civil oversight representative and legal counsel, announcing Kincaid and Miller's ongoing suspension and a partnership with a watchdog group to overhaul conduct standards and bias training. It wasn't everything Elijah had fought for, but it was a start sparked by Clara's refusal to stand. Change is slow, isn't it? Elijah felt the pushback almost immediately, hushed calls from former allies, awkward hallway talks, supervisors' sidelong glances treating him like a reminder of their own silence. The unspoken message? You broke the code. But Elijah hadn't broken anything, had he? He'd done what every officer should, protected the innocent, demanded justice. If that made him an outsider, so be it. He'd rather stand alone with integrity than drown in complicit silence. One night, Elijah sat beside Clara on the porch, crickets singing, the neighborhood still. Do you ever regret staying? He asked, his voice soft but searching. She didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning the darkened houses once filled with friends now gone. Can you feel the weight of her pause, the memories it held? I stayed, she said finally, because somebody had to. Oh, what a testament to her strength, to her unyielding roots in a town that had changed around her. Can you feel the quiet power of a moment that changes everything, where a single stand on a weathered porch becomes a beacon of truth? On that sacred porch in Meadowville, Georgia, Clara Jefferson's words hung in the air like a solemn vow. I stayed, she said, her voice steady, her eyes gleaming with the fire of a life unbowed, because somebody had to. Oh, what strength in those words, a testament to her roots in a town that had shifted around her. Elijah nodded slowly, his heart heavy with awe and ache. But it cost you, he said, his voice soft, carrying the weight of her sacrifices. Everything costs something, Clara replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the last light faded. But this house, this street, this chair, they were mine before anyone else moved in. I earned my space here, and I'm not about to let anyone push me out now. Can you hear the defiance in her tone, the unyielding claim to her place? Elijah's lips curved into a faint smile, a flicker of pride breaking through. You're stubborn, he teased. I'm right, she shot back, her words sharp and sure, a mother's wisdom cutting through the dusk. A car rolled by, its headlights washing over them, casting fleeting shadows before vanishing into the night. Clara rocked gently, her rhythm unbroken, the creak of her chair a steady heartbeat against the hum of crickets. You know, she said after a pause, her voice warm with love, I'm proud of what you did, not just for me but for them, for the ones who won't speak, the ones who never had anyone show up. Elijah looked at her, his eyes searching hers. I just hope it was enough, he said, his voice tinged with doubt. Clara turned to him, her gaze soft but certain, like a lighthouse in a storm. It's never enough, she said. That's why you keep going. Oh, didn't those words land like a call to arms, urging him forward? Elijah leaned back, staring up at the stars twinkling above, each one a silent witness to their stand. Inside, on the kitchen table, a pile of mail waited, support letters, speaking invitations, interview requests, but Clara hadn't touched them. Not yet. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. Her story was already told, wasn't it? Now it was time for others to raise their voices, to carry the torch she'd lit. Because real change, the kind that shifts the world, isn't in going viral or chasing hashtags. It's in holding your ground, saying no, staying seated, speaking out, and refusing to budge until the world catches up. And Clara? Oh, Clara was still sitting, still watching, her lavender dress catching the porch light's glow, her presence a quiet rebellion against anyone who'd dare push her aside. The town hall was packed, not with the casual chatter of elections or potlucks, but with a heavy, watchful silence that pressed against the walls. Can you feel the tension? People filled the rows in quiet clusters, some curious, some guilty, a few fearful, hoping for a sign that their small corner of the world hadn't tilted too far. Others, like Clara Jefferson, were there because they'd lived too long in silence to miss this moment. Did she want to be there? Not really. She'd have preferred her porch, her chamomile tea steaming in that proud mug, but Elijah had asked gently, and she'd agreed, not for herself, but for the message, for the young girls in the back rows watching, learning what courage looks like in a rocking chair. Elijah sat beside her, his suit pressed, tie slightly loose, a man who didn't seek the spotlight but wore it now, a symbol whether he wanted to be or not. The room buzzed with whispers, cell phone screens glowing as people scrolled through articles, some fixated on the headline, "Commander confronts deputies who threatened his mother." Can you imagine the stir that caused? The sheriff stepped to the microphone, his expression unreadable, his voice steady but softer, like a man balancing on a tightrope. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "We're here tonight because something happened in our town, something that should never have happened, an act of misjudgment, a failure of protocol, but most importantly, a failure of respect." His eyes flicked to Clara, a brief acknowledgement of the woman whose stand had forced this reckoning. "What occurred on Miss Clara Jefferson's porch was unacceptable," he continued. "It was a reflection of a deeper issue within our department, one we are now actively addressing. As of this morning, both officers involved remain suspended pending further review. We are implementing mandatory anti-bias training and introducing community oversight to ensure this does not happen again." Can you hear the weight of that admission, the crack in the facade? A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nods, some skeptical glances. Clara sat still, hands folded in her lap, her face calm but unreadable, a quiet storm of wisdom and resolve. Then, a moment no one saw coming, not so soon. From the auditorium side, a woman rose, Lindsay Parker, thin-framed, pale, her tight bun betraying her nerves. Her footsteps echoed too loudly on the tile, each one a drumbeat of uncertainty. Was it notes or a tissue she clutched so tightly? No one knew what to do. The sheriff stepped aside hesitant, unsure whether to halt her or let the moment unfold. Lindsay reached the front, turned to the crowd, and locked eyes with Clara. "My name is Lindsay Parker," she said, her voice brittle, trembling like glass about to shatter. "And I was the one who made the 911 call." Oh, didn't the room freeze, the air itself holding its breath? "I live across from Mrs. Jefferson," Lindsay went on, her words heavy, faltering. "And that night, I saw someone sitting on the porch. I didn't recognize her. I panicked, and I called the police." Her confession dropped into the silence, each word a stone sinking into a still pond. Clara didn't flinch, her gaze steady as granite. Elijah sat motionless beside her, his jaw tight. Lindsay took a shaky breath. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I didn't think I just thought something was wrong, and I was wrong." She gripped the lectern, her knuckles white. "I've lived in Meadowville for 5 years," she said, her voice breaking, "and I've never once walked across the street to say hello to Miss Jefferson, never introduced myself, never asked about her garden, her family, her story. I just assumed, and that assumption led to a chain of events I'll never forget, and I imagine she never will either." Can you feel the weight of her regret, the rawness of her admission? "Miss Jefferson," Lindsay said, tears brimming, "I am so sorry for the call, for the fear, for everything that followed. I was wrong, and I hope someday you can forgive me." The room held its breath, all eyes on Clara. Would she respond? She didn't move at first, didn't stand, didn't rush to speak. She let the silence grow, let it speak what words couldn't. When she finally rose, slow and graceful, her cane tapping softly on the floor, the hush deepened. She stopped just feet from Lindsay, who seemed smaller now, folded under the weight of her own guilt. Clara looked at her, not with anger or hatred, but with a stillness born of surviving countless such moments. "You were afraid," she said softly, her voice a quiet thunder. "That's what you said?" Lindsay nodded, tears spilling. "Yes. Clara tilted her head. Afraid of a woman drinking tea on her own porch? I didn't recognize. No, Clara cut in, gentle but firm. You didn't see me. And that's the problem. Lindsay's tears flowed freely now, her shoulders trembling. I've lived on that street longer than most of those houses have had paint on their walls, Clara said, her voice steady, resonant. I've planted flowers through droughts, watched 3 generations grow up under that maple tree, and you called the police on me because I didn't fit what you thought belonged. Can you hear the history in her words, the weight of a life claimed against all odds? Lindsay tried to speak, but Clara raised a hand, her gesture calm but commanding. I'm not here to shame you, she said. I've lived through worse than a phone call. But I'm here to say this: fear isn't a reason, and comfort isn't an excuse. If you want to live in a community, you've got to be part of it, not above it, not outside it. You have to show up, not with apologies, with actions. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only Lindsay could hear. I forgive you, she whispered, but I remember, and remembering means making sure this never happens again. Lindsay nodded, tears streaming, her breath hitching. Clara turned, her cane tapping as she returned to her seat, each step a testament to her grace. The crowd remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Elijah looked at his mother, his chest swelling, throat tight. Proud doesn't begin to cover it, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Clara sat, lifting her chin slightly. I didn't say it for her, she murmured. I said it for them. And as she looked out at the room, the young scribbling notes, elders with glistening eyes, officers at the back unsure of their place, she knew the truth. One apology didn't fix everything, but it was a start, wasn't it? Sometimes healing begins not with thunder, but with someone saying, I see you now. Evening draped Meadowville like a soft blanket, heavy with the day's burdens. Cicadas hummed their ancient song, a rhythm as old as the oaks. The sky, streaked with amber where the sun had dipped below the trees, faded to denim blue. On the porch, Clara rocked gently, her chair a sanctuary turned battleground, its chipped paint glowing under the porch light. Elijah sat beside her, his shoulders no longer taut with anger but heavy with thought, his suit jacket draped over the railing. 2 weeks had passed since that night. 2 weeks since deputies stormed these steps with assumptions in their eyes, since Clara refused to stand, not just from her chair but from her dignity, since Elijah drew a line between justice and silence. Can you feel the echo of that moment? The neighborhood had settled, or tried to. Reporters had moved on, the town grasping for normalcy. Meetings had been held, policies announced, committees formed, new guidelines, new promises. Some were sincere, others just craved the old, comfortable quiet. But Clara knew better, didn't she? Funny how quiet it is now, she said, breaking the silence, her voice soft but piercing. Elijah's faint smile held a trace of weariness. Too quiet. No, she said, just different, like the quiet knows what happened here. He nodded. It does. They sat in silence, the world spinning on, kids playing basketball across the street, their laughter like music, a woman walking her dog, a lawnmower humming nearby. But Clara's porch? Oh, it had changed. Not its look with the same flower pots and faded welcome mat, but its meaning, now a place where silence was shattered, where a woman said no and the world listened. Elijah leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten here in time. Clara's gaze softened, her eyes warm. But you did. He shook his head, frustration flickering. That's not the point. I shouldn't have needed to. She didn't argue, just looked out at the street, her silence heavy with understanding. You think that's new? She asked. You think you're the first man to wish he'd been somewhere sooner? No, he said, but I hate that we still have to wish. She reached over, her hand resting on his arm, steady as the earth. You can't carry all of it, Elijah. I'm not trying to carry all of it, he said softly, just my part. Silence fell again, broken only by the rocker's creak and the breeze rustling her rose bushes, their scent mingling with honeysuckle from the side yard. Elijah exhaled, slow and deliberate. They offered me a promotion, he said after a pause. Clara's eyebrow arched, a spark of pride in her eyes. Already? He nodded. Said the way I handled this showed leadership. Said I could be chief in 3 years if I stay on track. And what did you say? I haven't answered yet. Her smile was warm, knowing. They're not wrong. You were a leader before you had a title. Can you see the love in her words, the belief that had shaped him? He looked at her, his voice a near whisper. But I don't know if the system can really change, Mama. Not the way it's built, not the way it protects itself. She let his words linger, then answered, her voice steady as stone. Then maybe your job isn't to change it all at once. Maybe your job is to make it impossible for it to stay the same. Oh, didn't that truth sink deep, like roots in rich soil? Elijah stared ahead, the weight of it settling into him, bricks stacking in his chest. You always know just what to say, he said, a faint smile breaking through. She chuckled, soft and low. Only took 76 years to figure it out. A car passed slowly, its driver waving, a gesture Clara returned with a nod. The waves came more often now, small, but something. Do you think they see me differently? She asked quietly, her eyes tracing the street. Elijah followed her gaze. Some do, some always did, some never will. But now, she added, they don't get to look away. And wasn't that the heart of it? The truth had been seen, captured, undeniable. Once witnessed, it couldn't be ignored. The kettle whistled inside, its call sharp in the dusk. Elijah stood, but Clara waved him off. I've got it, she said, rising with the slow grace of someone who'd carried more than she'd ever tell. As she walked in, Elijah gazed at the street, seeing not just the neighborhood but their journey, past, present, and the battles ahead. Clara returned, tea in hand, handing him a cup, the steam curling between them, fragrant and soft. You know, she said, I never asked for any of this. I know, he said, but I'm glad it happened here on this porch in this house where you've built your whole life. He sipped, nodding. The world saw you. Her voice was sure, final. I saw myself. That's what mattered most. Can you feel the power in that, the strength of a woman who'd claimed her truth? Crickets sang louder, their song filling the dusk with music older than time. The porch light glowed, casting golden warmth over their faces. They sat, mother and son, side by side, quiet, proud, unmoving, unafraid. Sometimes resistance isn't loud, is it? It's quiet, a woman refusing to leave her porch, not out of defiance but dignity. Clara didn't shout, didn't fight, she stayed, and in staying, reminded us that strength isn't always fists. It's presence, memory, knowing who you are and refusing to shrink. For those who've seen the world change, often not for the better, Clara's story is a clarion call. We matter. Our voices, stories, stillness, they carry weight. Don't let anyone make you feel small for growing older, for staying rooted, for holding memories others might forget. If you've ever felt dismissed, invisible, let Clara's porch remind you, your place is earned, not granted. You don't need permission to stand proud. Sometimes, just sitting still is the most radical act of all. So stay steady, stay proud, and never let them say your story doesn't matter, because it does, now more than ever. If this touched your heart, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support keeps these stories alive. Oh, Clara Jefferson's story on that Meadowville porch hits like a quiet thunderclap, doesn't it? It's a raw, emotional testament to the enduring strength of a woman who refused to be erased, whose stillness became a roar against injustice. I'm moved to tears by her dignity, how she sat, unyielding in her rocking chair, facing down deputies with the weight of a lifetime's worth of battles. Can you feel the power in her refusal, the way she claimed her space despite a world that too often tried to push her out? Her story isn't just about one evening, it's a mirror to the systemic biases that linger, the assumptions that wound, and the courage it takes to stand firm. Elijah's arrival, oh what a moment. His calm fury, born of love and justice, transformed that porch into a stage where truth confronted power. I'm struck by the pride and pain in their bond, Clara's teachings shaping a son who not only survived but led, and his resolve to hold those accountable who dared threaten his mother's peace. Yet, the ache remains. Why must such moments still happen? Clara's question, how many more next times will it take? Cuts deep, a reminder that change is slow, and the fight for respect is relentless. Lindsay's apology, raw and faltering, was a step, but Clara's response, forgiving yet remembering, showed a grace that humbles me. This story is a call to action, urging us to see, to act, to build communities where no one fears their own porch. Clara's porch, with its chipped paint and blooming roses, is a symbol of resilience, a reminder that our stories matter, that dignity is non-negotiable. I'm inspired, heartbroken, and determined, because Clara's stand demands we keep going, keep fighting, keep believing in a world that sees us all.